solid wood processing. Here you see me starting to cross-cut my rough milled lumber, in this case some figured cherry, getting my parts sort of loosely to their dimensions. I like to cut them about 4 inches larger than what I need in the end. This allows for mistakes and things to happen along the way. Now that we've cross-cut everything to sort of rough dimensions, it's time for me. I like to face everything first, get that first relatively flat face. I'd shoot for, I don't know, a couple inches in from the inner. I always face the concave side down. And once I establish enough meat there that's flat, the planer can take over. So I don't always go all the way to a completely flat surface. But anyway, I'll shut up now. You can watch me just do it. There we have future stiles and rails and some picture frame parts for the mirror. Everything now has one flat plane, allowing me to go to the sliding table for a straight lining session. Straight lining with the flat plane down gives one square edge so I can head to the bandsaw and rip my pieces closer to their final dimensions before thicknessing. The wood always releases tension when its state or size is changed from the stabilized form it started as, so I like to try and get as much of this tension out and work with the smallest pieces possible every step of the way, so I make less dramatic changes and cuts at each new step as I whittle the chunks into the parts I want. Now that I've ripped my pieces, I'll use the joiner to clean one edge and flatten where the tension released from the ripping caused some minor bending in the pieces. Once that is all done, I'm ready to thickness everything to the dimensions I want using the planer. Here you can see me gluing two pieces together to create the stack of drawer fronts that I want. What? Water and wood? On wood going into a machine? What the heck am I doing? This is a trick taught to me by my grandfather some 40 years ago or more. With figured woods like this, it is often hard to plane completely downhill as the grain switches back on you in spots, which can lead to tear out. Well, for my final passes, I like to wet the surface to be planed. I let the water soak into the fibers to soften them up for a bit. Then I wipe them down with a damp towel to make sure there are no puddles or bare spots. Then I run them through the planer, removing about a 32nd of an inch, and voila, no tear out at all. And it works for both faces and edges. Just watch and see. For things like stiles and rail parts, I like to get my final width dimension, sending them through the planer on edge rather than ripping them on a saw. It is much more consistent than me going through all those pieces pushing on a rip fence, plus not as much chance for human error. I can hiccup while a piece is in the planer, but if I do that on a table saw, there will be a little gouge or worse. Now, since all these required a different number of passes over the joiner to get them flat and straight, I initially feed them through one at a time, but once they are the same width, I can send them through 3 or so or more at a time. Wow, will you look at that? How perfect they all are and how clean those figured edges are using my grandfather's water trick. It's beautiful stuff. Next, fresh from the clamps, I want to thickness my future drawer fronts to the same thickness as my stiles and rails. You can see me using the waterworks again from the view of the helmet cam this time, and I hope the footage is not too jarring, but I think you can really start to see that beautiful figure, and you'll get to see the results kind of up close and personal here. So sit back and enjoy. Man, ain't that something? Look at that. Not a bit of tear out. Yes, sir. That sure trick works. Alright, now it's time to take it over to the old bench and start putting pieces next to each other and seeing where I want which style to go next to which piece, etc., etc. I don't know, maybe I am a little nutty. I guess it's just the way my process works. I don't know if anybody really notices in the final project when the pieces are done, but I think I do. And anyway, it's the way I like to work. So I've marked all my pieces and I'm ready to cross-cut them to their final, well, near final dimensions. I like to oversize my door parts a bit so that I can trim the doors square using the slider after they're glued up rather than trying to glue them up perfectly, which I find tedious and often anything but perfect. Well, there's all my stile and rail parts. It's shaper time. Here you can see me coping my rails. 4 of these are on the small side and the other 4 are tiny. In cases like this, I find it best to surround the piece to be cut with support. Not just to clamp down, but a clamp in too. I like to cope first and profile next. That way my backer board on my crosscut fence can keep the blowout in check. If I profile first, then one side of my rails will have nothing to prevent blowout because of the groove, creating a sloppier joint or worse, potentially unusable piece. I'm planning a more detailed video on just how I like to cope things on the shaper and why I do it the way I do it. All the rails are coped and ready for profiling. Ain't they nice? Well, again, with such small pieces, I like to surround them in my jigs or gang them together, so that I can get them through the shaper without things going all kablooey. Here you see this simple jig that I use to run the profiles through. It's just a push jig that I use for all sorts of things. You've seen it before with my small parts. But anyway, here you can see me, kind of backing up that small piece and getting ready to run through. Whereas the styles, well, they're long enough that they can just be run through by themselves. Man, does that put a smile on my face every time it happens. Profiled precision pairing. It never gets old. Next, I'll move into some veneer cutting for the door panels. Here you can see the simple setup I use when I only need to make a handful of resaw cuts. This veneer will be adhered to apply with substrate. Here you can see the process from gluing the book matches together, applying them to the plywood by stacking them together for one pressing, and then running them through the sander to get them just so.
Yo te traigo esta bomba puertorriqueña. Yo te la traigo de Cupey, de Vega Baja y de Santurce, de toda
the veneers on the substrate, the panel is a little too thick for the groove. So here you can see me rebidding them to fit using a dado blade. Before I glue up the doors, I double check to see which way I want to orient the panels, and then it's off to the presses. You can see I didn't use any major jigging to make sure the doors were square coming out of glue up. Generally, my parts are so precise that when things get fit together, they are damn close to just right anyway. Nonetheless, I don't know if you remember, but I like to oversize my doors and then trim them to their final dimension on the slider. And this is the step where everything gets squared to the thousandths of an inch. Woohoo! Here you see I'm using my parallel jig setup to get those first two edges nice and parallel into their final dimension, and then the cross cuts will square things up and also get that top and bottom to their final dimensions. Now that the doors are cut, I will cut the drawer fronts in order from that one piece that I glued up just for this. For this project, I'm planning a strip of inlay for the drawer fronts made from the leftover veneer. So here you can see me cutting the veneer pieces into the pieces that I'll use and then put into the drawer fronts. Once that is done, I can prepare the doors and drawers for hardware and then apply some finish. In this case, a waterborne alkyd varnish that is sprayed on. All that is left now is to make the picture frame for the mirror. I'm using a multi-profile set for the shaper, trying to find a profile that meshes with what I used on the doors. So that was a two-stage molding, meaning it required two separate setups to achieve what I was looking for. Then I rebate them to receive the mirror and is on to the accent wood that I'm using to complete the frame. In this case, more zebra wood to go with the panels. Here you can see me working in stages to create the rebate on a larger piece of zebra wood, ripping it on the bandsaw to the size I want, truing the new edge on that larger piece to the joiner, and then doing it all again to get to the pieces I want. See, even with a combination machine, I have stations which require no changeover between functions. So a little spray on those pieces and they'll be good to go. And we do our final bit of hardwiring and detailing there on the cabinet. And once that happens, we're ready for install. Nice thing about this particular two pieces of wood is the cherry, after about a year, is going to get super, super rich and deeper in color, and the zebra wood will lend itself more towards the amber range. So the contrast between the two woods should be, very striking. Anyway, that's all for now. Hope you enjoyed this portion of our project.